For decades, we were told that silver was just another industrial metal. A useful one, sure, but nothing special. In fact, the US government was so convinced of this, they sold off their entire strategic stockpile down to the very last ounce. While something has fundamentally changed, quietly, without any major fanfare, the official policy has done a complete 180-degree turn. Silver has been reclassified, and the shockwaves from this decision are just beginning to be felt. Welcome to the Bullion Signal Podcast, the channel where we look at the macro trends, the precious metals, and the critical information you need to protect and grow your wealth in these uncertain times. Today, we're diving deep into one of the biggest under-the-radar stories in the metals market, why the U.S. government now considers silver a national security asset. Stick with us, because what we're about to unpack could reshape the entire silver market for years to come. And if you find this analysis valuable, make sure you're subscribed to the Bullion Signal podcast so you never miss a critical update. So, let's start with the big question, right? How does a metal that we see in our jewelry, our silverware, our electronics, how does that suddenly get elevated to the same strategic importance as things like uranium or rare earth elements? What changed to make this everyday metal a matter of national security? That's the core puzzle we're going to piece together today.
To really get what's happening, you have to understand the official language the government uses. They have a special list for materials that are absolutely vital, and that list is called the Critical Minerals List. Now, to get on this list, a mineral has to meet two very specific criteria. First, it has to be essential for the economy or for national defense, non-negotiable. Second, and this is key, its supply chain has to be fragile, vulnerable to being cut off or disrupted. It's that combination of high importance and high risk that gets you the critical label.
And here it is. This is the event that changes the game. In November of 2025, the U.S. Geological Survey made it official. Silver was added to the critical minerals list. Now, this isn't just some bureaucratic paperwork shuffle. This designation is a trigger. It unlocks a whole new set of government powers, priorities, and, most importantly, demand for the metal. The government has officially signaled that securing a silver supply is now a strategic priority.
Okay, so why? Why now, after all these years of selling it off and calling it just another commodity? Well, the first and most urgent driver is a massive strategic vulnerability that the Pentagon can no longer afford to ignore. Let's call it the Pentagon's growing silver problem.
Let's start with a number. Take a good look at this. Roughly 500 troy ounces. That's over 30 pounds, almost 14 kilograms of silver. Now, what do you think in the world requires that much pure silver for a single unit?
That is the amount of silver required to build one single Tomahawk cruise missile. Think about that for a second. Every single time one of these indispensable high-tech weapons is built or used, hundreds of ounces of silver are consumed. They are gone, vaporized, never to be recovered. Now multiply that by the thousands of missiles in the U.S. arsenal and the thousands more they'd need in any major conflict. You start to see the scale of the problem.
So why on earth do they need so much silver? It comes down to physics and the brutal realities of modern warfare. Silver has the highest electrical and thermal conductivity of any metal on the planet. Nothing else comes close. In a missile pulling extreme g-forces, facing intense vibrations and temperature swings, you need every one of its thousands of electrical connections to be perfect. Silver ensures that the guidance systems, the telemetry, the communications, the very brain of the weapon works without fail. For these life-or-death, mission-critical functions, there is simply no substitute. You can't replace it with copper or aluminum and expect the same performance. It's silver, or it's nothing. And this quote just lays the situation bare. The source puts it so bluntly, and it's absolutely correct. The Pentagon has woken up to the fact that you cannot fight a 21st century war without a massive, steady supply of silver. And here's the kicker. Their own strategic stockpile of the metal is zero. None. They sold it all off, thinking they could just buy what they needed on the open market. They've created a critical dependency with no safety net.
So on one side of the equation, you have this massive, non-negotiable demand from the military. That's the first reason for this policy shift. The other half of the equation, the second reason it's now officially critical, is about where that silver actually comes from. And when you look at that, you see an increasingly fragile and risky global supply chain.
This chart tells a really important story. The world's silver production is heavily concentrated. Look at those top two slices of the pie. Mexico and Peru together account for over 40% of all the new silver that is mined in the entire world each year. When more than 2/5 of a critical resource comes from just two countries, you have what's known in security circles as a concentration risk.
And that concentration risk becomes a massive vulnerability when you look at what's actually happening on the ground in those two countries. They are both facing enormous challenges. In Mexico, you have a government that's becoming increasingly hostile to mining, banning new open-pit mines and tightening regulations. In Peru, you have a state of chronic social and political instability, where protests and blockades can shut down major mines and the routes to get the metal out, sometimes for weeks or months at a time. These aren't small problems. They are systemic headwinds that threaten the stability of the global supply.
So let's just put a fine point on it. We're talking about over 40% of the world's annual silver supply coming from regions that are facing significant and, in many ways, escalating instability. For a Pentagon planner looking at this, that is a 5-alarm fire. This right here is the very definition of a supply chain vulnerable to disruption. This is the second key that turned the lock on silver's critical mineral status.
Okay, so the government has woken up. They see the non-negotiable demand from defense, and they see the shaky supply chain. The problem has been officially acknowledged. So, what happens now? Let's look at the powerful new tools this designation gives the government to solve its silver problem.
By declaring silver a critical mineral, the government has unlocked the powers of the Defense Production Act, or DPA. This is a huge deal. It's essentially a wartime powers act for industrial supply chains. It means the government can now legally force any U.S. miner or refiner to fill military contracts before they fill any orders from Apple or Tesla or a solar panel company. Defense contractors get to jump to the front of the line. The government can also use the DPA to provide loans and grants to encourage more domestic silver mining. And, most critically, it gives them the legal authority to do something they haven't done in decades: start building a brand new strategic national stockpile of silver.
Now, this new reality, the fact that the government and its contractors can now prioritize their buying, leads to a very compelling theory. Is it possible that a shadow bid for silver is already happening? Are these large strategic players, defense contractors who know they'll need millions of ounces for future orders, already quietly moving in and securing physical silver behind the scenes before any official stockpiling program is even announced?
When you start connecting the dots, the evidence is intriguing. First, the silver price has been unusually strong, even during periods when demand from retail investors, people buying coins and bars, has been relatively quiet. That suggests a large, steady buyer is in the market. Second, the global silver market has been in a structural supply deficit for 4 years straight, meaning more silver is being consumed than is being mined. Third, we're seeing a steady, relentless drain of physical silver from the registered inventories of the major exchanges, like the COMEX in New York and the vaults in London. That metal is going somewhere. And finally, you see other strategic actors, like Russia, publicly announcing they're adding silver to their national reserves. The pieces certainly seem to fit.
So, let's put it all together. You have new, massive, price-insensitive demand from the defense sector. You have an increasingly fragile and risky supply chain, and you have a government armed with new powers to secure that supply. If you're an investor trying to navigate this, what does this all mean for the silver market going forward? Let's look at the source's thesis on where this is all heading. First, let's just anchor ourselves in the present. This isn't just a theory about the future. The market has already started to react in a big way. In 2025 alone, we've seen the price of silver more than double, surging from under $30 an ounce all the way up to around $65. This isn't a random spike. This is the market beginning to wake up and price in this new, fundamental reality of government-level strategic demand.
The source believes this will play out in 3 distinct phases. Phase 1, which we are in right now in 2025, is the recognition phase. The smart money sees the writing on the wall and the price surges as this new reality is digested. This is projected to be followed by Phase 2, the scramble, in the years ahead. This is when the buying becomes urgent and open. Governments and defense contractors openly compete for a limited physical supply, which could cause major supply shocks and shortages for other industries. Finally, that would lead to Phase 3, a new equilibrium, where the market finally settles down, but at a permanently and significantly higher price that reflects silver's new status as a strategic asset.
And I think this final quote really says it all. For the first time in a generation, the United States government is back in the silver market. But this time, they're not a seller. They are a strategic, motivated, and price-insensitive buyer. They have identified a national security need, and they will get the silver they require. They have now entered a room that was already crowded with industrial users, solar manufacturers, EV makers, and investors. And as the quote says, they are not leaving empty-handed. That is a fundamental paradigm shift, and it changes the entire landscape for silver investors going forward. Thank you for joining us on the Bullion Signal podcast. If you found this breakdown insightful, please like, share, and subscribe so you can stay ahead of the curve. We'll see you next time. Now for our disclaimer. The content in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It should not be considered financial or investment advice. All listeners should conduct their own research and are solely responsible for their own investment decisions.